My name is Sierra Gonzalez, and I'm with the Skoll Foundation. Welcome to Thursday of the Forum. I'm excited to welcome you to the Lightning Talks Architecting Inclusive Cities, which may or may not be about architecture. In this session, you will hear from leaders who are shaping the future of cities to address the needs of all citizens. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Geci Karuri-Sebina from the South African Cities Network.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So I can clarify the question. Is this about architecture? No, it's not. Sorry if you were hoping it was. We can talk about that after the session if you'd like. But the idea about thinking about cities in the future of cities, particularly cities in the global south, and I think that's largely what we're going to talk about today, is something that's extremely exciting, I think, to many people, scary for many other people, but as tends to happen with the future, is largely unknown. And I think in the context of this conference, that seems to be an interesting space to speak into, and that's what we're doing this morning. So my name is Geci Karuri-Sebina. I'll be your moderator today, and I'll be joined by a fantastic panel of people who just don't talk and write about these things like I do, but are actually doing stuff. And so we're going to be with Smruti Jukur, who's with SPARC in Mumbai, and so we're excited to have her doing work in Asia and Africa. Chris Underhill and Moitreyee, who are doing amazing work with citiesRISE, and I'll introduce them all a little bit better later. Shauna Carey from Ideal.org. And Mayor Mohammed Sowah from Accra in Ghana, West Africa. And so I think we have an exciting time ahead of us where we begin to ask. Now, you have to excuse the paper. I haven't attended my TED training yet, so I need prompts, otherwise I tend to waffle. If I can just go into some slides here. Many of you know this. I think this idea about what's happening globally, demographically, the fact that population has grown exponentially, the fact that we've gotten to where 55% plus of world population is living in large cities just in the recent while. It's always interesting and quite dramatic to see these statistics, and they're shown in many different ways. And what's significant about them, I think, when we talk about cities, is just this idea that between now and 2050, we've got a huge population, close to 70% of global population concentrating in cities of 1 million plus. So that's the little bubbles on the side. A lot of this growth is going to be in Africa and Asia. And the other nice shock statistic is often that half of the world's population growth between now and 2500 is going to be in Africa alone. And most of that will be urban. Now, the question is, what does all of this mean? I think for many of us, it spells change that we can't even fathom. But for many of us, it also spells interesting opportunity to think about a future. Now, in my home country of South Africa, it reflects often in ways like this. So what we begin to see are narratives and visuals and experiences that speak to the aspirations, to the expectations, to the demands of intense urban populations, young, generally, who are increasingly violent and aware and protesting. And that's because they're demanding social and economic equity and justice and things that many of our sort of standard policies and neoliberal ideas about how things ought to work don't satisfy. And what does that mean for the future? We can't ignore or suppress these. And they're a really urban phenomenon. This isn't something we saw, and we've seen it increase with the rate of urbanization. So globally, you'll be aware that the UN, obviously, in 2015 ratified the SDGs and acknowledged the importance of the urban in SDG 11, talking about how we make cities more resilient, safe, and sustainable. That was followed in 2016 with the new urban agenda, which many countries in the recent years are now localizing to look for local expression about what these ideas mean around how you plan and finance cities better. But I think for many of us working in the space, what's really clear is that the struggle is real. The challenges are huge, the solutions are evasive, and in many of our cities where the informal footprint of our city is rapidly outpacing the formal planned parts of our city, cities are planning themselves while we're busy with our plans and policies, and that's something that we really, I think, in a lot of the kind of work I suspect the panel does, are constantly grappling with. And so for an audience like this, I guess the questions it might begin to spark are, what's our agency? What's our opportunity to make sense of this, to participate, to contribute? How can we actually architect a more inclusive future? So I want to open the session with three, what I want to call invitations. These are invitations about the kind of discussion I'm hoping we'll be able to have together this morning. And this is because cities have been described as being both problem-rich but also solution-rich. So it really is the case that the solutions may reside in the very problem as I'm beginning to frame it. My first provocation, or my first question to us is, can we imagine anything different? Can we envision the future cities in the South? So many of us think of cities as London, New York, Shanghai, Dubai, or we think about them as good, positive utopian futures or bad dystopian sci-fi horror movie kind of futures. Are there other ways that are possible? And do we have the capacity, can we develop the capacity to imagine things being different? Can we actually imagine new imaginaries for cities and open up many new possibilities for the future and not just the this or that kind of thinking? My second invitation is, can we open up the space for an abundance of ideators? So instead of those of us in the room who think we're busy trying to solve for 1 billion poor people in slums all over the world, could we imagine what that billion is doing or thinking anyway? And are there any seeds for what is possible there? Are we able to work with people in new ways? Can we tune in to some otherwise that might reside in this huge, huge margin that we're already faced with? Can we have more inclusive processes? What does that look like? And my third invitation is, can we really decolonize the institutions that we reside in? A Ghanaian colleague on a panel recently said that we seem to keep trying to put new wine in old wineskins. And that often doesn't work. And I think many of us have had that experience of trying to work within institutions or systems or methodologies or tools that aren't really designed to do anything different from what they're doing already. How do you actually do something different? How do you actually architect or actualize cities differently? Is that something we can begin to think about? And these are the kinds of ideas we want to explore today. And it could very well be that cities have already been signaling other possibilities. Are we able to sense and see these small, interesting things that are out there? Or are we so stuck in our structures and molds and missions and institutions and hierarchies that we can't even see potential where it may already be? Sometimes in curious, sometimes disappointing, but sometimes surprising and feasible ways. What's our ability to tune into that? Now, I'm just asking questions. What's great is that we've got practitioners in the room who are actually doing things and thinking about cities in really diverse and interesting ways. We're going to have them come up and share their ideas and their work with you and hopefully have a bit of a conversation after that. I'd encourage you to keep questions. We'll take very brief questions of just clarity after each presentation, but we'll have a nice space at the end, I think, to really have a more robust engagement. So please do note those down. And so without further ado, I'm going to invite up Smruti Jukur from Mumbai. So she's an urban planner, she says emphatically not an architect, who works mainly in Southeast Asia and Africa with SPARC, which is a Society for the Promotion of Area Resource Center. And they're an affiliate of SDI, for those of you who know about the great work that Slum Dwellers International do. And she'll be sharing with us on reframing public policies and principles in how we think about urban growth. So welcome, Smruti.
Thank you. Thank you, Geci, for setting the tone. Apologies, I'm going to use a little bit of my notes. Since 2011 and 2012, what we know is that the planet is now urban. And in 2019, where we stand, we are anticipating for positive and negative outcomes. Positively, we are saying that cities can produce densification. They've become safe havens for refugees, for climate change, and for conflict. But they're only positive if the cities are ready to accommodate. But at the moment, there is no evidence that the leadership of the cities, as they speak of, are putting into place policies, practices, and investments to produce inclusive planning that not only accommodate the existing poor, but also produce the elasticity the cities require to accommodate these densifications. The National Slum Dwellers Federation, Mahila Milan, and SPARC, the alliance that we know of in India, under Jokin's leadership, sought to transform the urban poor from being criminal, illegal, invisible, beneficiaries, consumers, supplicants of all these words that we know of, to organize in large numbers to demand inclusion, to demand voice, and to constantly demonstrate to the city that not only when they become a part of producing solutions can the city claim to be the change makers and to be the transformations of tomorrow. And today, all of us who have come from SDI have seen that what started to become a small movement from India has globally now targeted working in 33 countries to become part of this change. So when we are facing a scenario, especially in the global south, when we know that 60 to 80% of people are locked in poverty, in informality, something is seriously wrong with the governance and the policy frameworks of the national and local governments. Good intentions and good philanthropy are not going to change a world in which governments are spending on the poor is decreasing, and the world is gearing up for more and more foreign direct investments. So to stay in this discussion and to discuss that most of the current discussions are dominated in the climate change world, where there is very little discussion about what kind of money is being spent on slums and their improvements, and how can we have change in frameworks. Let us look at that today. So my talk is about rethinking urbanism. It's this tone that Geci just set. What is the imagery of a city if we have a bird's eye view? Most of us could think of something like this, which is gridironed, organized, because that's how we've been biased and trained to think about. We have something like this. Could they look different is the question. What about this? These are favelas in Rio, Kibera in Nairobi, slums of Haiti, Ankara in Turkey. We've always had the debate of formal versus informal. In a normal setting, urban setting, this is a very interesting image that looks at the formal and the informal at Kia Sands in Johannesburg, and I really like this image. What we've always been trained to is to look at the greenfield sites that is very easy to work with. So you have plain landfills where you have formal setup, which is very easy to give services to these areas. But what happens if you change the knowledge diagram to something like this? Are we equipped? In today's world, let me tell you that no institution, no planning frameworks, no mechanisms, and no governments are trained to deal with something like this. You don't know where to start. The only way to do with this is to begin with working with people. And this is an image of Dharavi, which a lot of you might be knowing of from Mumbai. How do you work in a situation like this, where these settlements, and they're not new settlements, they've been there for even before the city existed, they've been sedimented in time, have been migrant population looking for areas to settle in, mostly port lands, railway lands, and lands where they have minimum risk for evictions. They have their own systems of design of sanitation and other services because they just don't know any other way of doing it. They have their own access and their own habitat. But what do we do? What has the city always done with them? Has evicted, demolished with them, because we know no other way than having the gridiron patterns. What do we do with them? I love this image. It's a cartoon that shows of how we move from high-rise to high-rise densification from low-rise. And this is what it looks like in reality. This is rehabilitation, an imagery of densification from another area in Mumbai. And this is what it looks on the inside, because they've been neglected over time and they just don't know how to live in this scenario which we have created for them. Is there an alternative is the question for today. Global voices and local choices. What Sheila Patel quotes it as townships under siege. So I'm going to show you 3 cases that we've been working in the last 2 years. These are all townships because they are the size of Oxford, or maybe a little lesser, smaller, but then they have population 5 times that of Oxford. So this is Penjaringan. It's a port land in North Jakarta. The government, in their urban planning norms, have designated this as gray areas, which is actually industrial. But if you look at it closely, for the last 70 years, we have people living here in informal settlements that are catering to the port area. This is Dharavi in Mumbai. Most of you know about it. And this is Mukuru in Nairobi, and this is the case that I would be talking about a little bit more in detail. So we have worked together to digitize these poor people on paper, that the communities themselves organize, they count themselves, they give themselves addresses because they have no other addresses. And they are able to put together a global campaign that collects and consolidates citywide data on informal settlements, which becomes the basis for inclusive development and planning because no government has any information left. So this is how we collate all the information put together. So in 2007, this is how Mukuru would look like. It further densified in 2008. And in 2016, there is no more further scope of densification. It took a small team, which then grew up to a very large team of 420 community data collection team, to produce a map like this, which had 30 villages, further clustered, putting more information, digitizing it, and putting in all kinds of community services and facilities that we could think of into GIS to produce a map like this, to finalize something like this. So today we are working with 40 different international and national organizations, architects, planners, everyone, with 7 different thematic areas with the county in order to prepare what is called as the special planning area. There is a new, team that has been created to work with this to produce a gazetted document and to prepare a planning framework which does not exist in the real world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Smruti. I think this is a really great example about unvisioning and rethinking how we think about planning. Are there any questions of clarification before we move on to the next speaker? And there should really be clarifications. We're all comfortable? Okay, there is one here, so let's take you, ma'am. We've got a mic for you, just in case you need this.
When you showed the last image, the streets that you were showing, those streets, are you planning them, or are they actually existing within the framework?
So they're already there because the streets are like the skeleton which people use, and everything around the land use has been evolved around the streets. So we keep the basic structure of the skeleton as it is, and then we try to improvise where we want to bring in public transport systems within the township of Mukuru.
So you're amplifying these kind of small streets into bigger streets, or you're just leaving
No, only where there is a possibility and where people are willing to change the streets the way they are today.
Any others? Okay, there's one there. Yes, let's take that.
Hi. I was wondering when you separated the space into what you call little villages. Is that what you said? Did I hear that correctly?
They are existing villages, which was not, there was no demarcation for it, right, because there is a very different complexity of land here. There are structure owners and there are village owners. So you need to sort of demarcate these villages on paper.
Yeah, I was wondering if with the crowdsource moment you had with the community, if the purpose of that was to understand how people, the systems of belonging, basically in this massive space, or if it was pre-existing villages that you were aware of. Like, what was kind of the purpose of this moment of gathering the community?
So the purpose was twofold. One is to understand which is the basic unit that you can begin negotiations with to begin. And the second thing is because the land ownership pattern is based on this demarcation. So those were the two reasons why we started with that. And then you can also have a team that works at these different levels. So like in planning frameworks, we have a ward as a basic unit where you would begin with the basic governance. So here we would start at a village level. So we have a hierarchy for that.
And so which knowledge did you gain from your work with the community?
What knowledge?
Yeah.
So we were able to come up with a different hierarchy. So we have a cluster, village, then you have a segment, which is a combination of 7 or 8 villages. And that kind of framework in the urban planning framework doesn't exist. So we are redefining these new frameworks and planning norms with the government to say that how could we solve the problem when it is something like this. And because if you look at the city ward boundaries, there are 4 wards that come together in Mukuru alone. So there is no one ward taking a responsibility of providing services to their own area, and they're always blaming one another.
So I think this is really important because often people talk about informal spaces as though they are just informal as in disorderly and there's no order that exists. It's a different order and sometimes it takes a lot to make sense of it. Thank you so much for this. Thank you for this input. So we're going to move right on to our next presenter. So we've got Chris Underhill and Moitreyee Sinha, who are the co-leads of citiesRISE, which I hope to visit one day. And this is a multi-stakeholder initiative designed to promote mental health by catalyzing collective actions across sectors with urban centers around the world. So I'm looking forward to hearing about how we can rethink our health systems. Welcome, Chris, and welcome, Moitreyee. I will give this to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm an awardee of the Skoll World Forum, and the award was given in 2013 for the organization BasicNeeds. Now, that's an organization that works in mental health, particularly in community areas. So it was quite a long time before that when I began to realize what an important and difficult subject mental illness was. And I hadn't understood that as I had been working on other social enterprises in my earlier career. But by the year 2000, I had begun to understand that some 450 million people suffer from mental illness at any one time. I was deeply shocked by that. And I was also astonished to find that mental illness is very much an illness which affects young people, particularly people coming into their first careers and people coming into their, what you might call their bloom, between the ages of 11 and right up, 21, and then right up again to the young 30s. So I resolved to do something about it, and BasicNeeds was created. Then it was another shock to recognize exactly the kind of problem that Geci herself has just put up on the board in her facilitator's presentation, realizing what an extraordinary growth of population we all were, as it were, responsible for one way or the other. I hadn't realized what an extraordinary growth there would be in population and how people would congregate in cities. And I began to ask myself the question, what's going to happen to mentally ill people in those cases, in those situations? And what's going to happen if urbanization at its worst, and there are many aspects that are not worse, but at its worst, what's going to happen? Is it going to create even more mental illness, actually? I began to ask. It was around that time that I met my colleague Moitreyee Sinha, who will be presenting to you in a second. And she originally came on board to help me think about the scale-up of the work at BasicNeeds. And we very quickly began to understand that actually there would need to be a response which was more substantial and more focused on the urban area. And so we very willingly began to work at that. And in 2016, at an important conference in Washington named Out of the Shadows, run by the World Bank and the World Health Organization, the first baby from that particular idea was born, and we called it MH Now, or Mental Health Now, a collective action. And from there was born the organization called citiesRISE, which is dedicated to working on this issue of mental health and the big city. So I'd like to ask my colleague and our chief executive, co-founder alongside myself, Moitreyee Sinha, to come and do the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about, it's going to be the story of fire and scaffolding. And when I first started looking at the issue of mental health a few years back, the sheer scale and the complexity of the issue was fascinating. You know, on one hand, you're looking at an issue that is as old as humanity. On the other hand, as a subject in development, it's very nascent. And then when you combine that in the backdrop of this rapidly changing world that we live in, and the breakdown of social structures, the massive scale of displacement, the pervasive use of technology, then the consequences and the impact of that is staggering. And so because of that, when we look around and we look at what's happening in our world and in our communities and in our society, what the world truly needs is a paradigm shift. And because of that, we are focusing on this intersection of young people and cities. On one hand, you need to build new types of construct that, as I think Smruti was talking about, that where you need leadership, where you need to unleash the local energy, the new learning capacity, you need to bring in new actors. So there has to be new kind of transformation that is made possible. And how do we do that in this current ecosystem? So this is where we'll talk a little bit about citiesRISE and the reason why we are focusing on young people and cities. On one hand, the systems change, and other hand, the energy of a movement. So as we all talked about a little bit, that very often we think of cities and we think of bricks and mortar and we think about these as big metropolis. But no, cities are living and breathing creatures. And this is where you have the actual neighborhoods, the communities where people live, where dreams are born, where hopes are shattered, where people find meaning in lives. So we really have to think of this as sort of units of change, where disruption is possible, where these places can become social innovation labs, if you will, through which young people or cities can really look at the service and support of larger humanity and think about intergenerational collaborations and cross-sectoral partnerships. And that's part of the motivation of this work. So as we started this work, we really spent a lot of time just being on the ground and listening and learning and trying to understand what are the local nuances, what is happening in the journey of people's lives, whether it's a Nairobi or a Chennai or a Bogota. And we took a lens of this is something that is not just an issue of a low, middle, high income country. It's something that is relevant for all humanity. So we looked across all different countries and cultures and contexts and really tried to understand what is local contextual, whereas what is shared collectively. And through that actually came the focus on this life journey of young people. So as you look at this visual here, what we are motivating here is to look at right from early childhood, from pregnancy to adolescence to adulthood, to really think about that context and the culture in which people live and grow up. And to take that broader lens, as we show in the visual there, that how do we take a larger population lens? How do we look at entire populations and look at how do we keep people healthy? How do we look at people who are more at high risk, whether it's refugees, whether it's teenage mothers, whether it's people with HIV, or how do we look at people who need immediate support? And that led us to the discussion on what is the definition of a mental health friendly city. And this is where, I think we spent, again, a lot of time really listening to the insights of people. And this is just a quick picture where it's showing young people in Chennai and really figuring out that what is happening in these communities. And the same exercise happening simultaneously in a Bogota, in a Seattle, in a Sacramento, in a Nairobi, to really work on one hand with people and their life journeys, but also looking at the global evidence. What are the best models? What are the innovations? What's happening in Australia, in Canada, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa? And how do we accelerate the uptake of all these solutions with these cities being sort of the demand points, if you will? And this led to this is happening right now, is the creation of what we are calling a city playbook. So what is Nairobi's own aspirations or Bogota's own aspirations? And while it's very different, in one case you have a post-conflict situation, in other case you have other issues, that how does the community, along with different stakeholders, the civil society, private sector, government, young people, how do they look at all the different touch points? Who are all the different people and what are the different institutions, online, offline, that touches all of these people, and that journey from the self to the families, to the communities, to the broader society, what is known to work and what's happening in that local ecosystem that we can build on. And this is a quick picture of Nairobi in action. And what is showing here is that the local and global energies coming together to see how do you accelerate the possibilities in Nairobi. So here is a quick picture of one of the slums, and here the young people, there's complete lack of any kind of services or support, and they are using arts and culture as a way to change mindsets, as a way to bring awareness and look for peer support and other types of mechanisms. And that's happening in the same college campuses, and the picture on the right below here is showing now discussions between some of the global experts, some of the local experts, to think about what is possible to do and accelerate some of the work here. And this then led to this fascinating coming together of Nairobi, Chennai, and all of the different cities to see the definition of what is a mental health friendly city. And this is the first definition where it's showing the changes in those 4 key areas: narrative, access, social connectedness, and healthy environments. And from there, basically, this is what we are creating, that how do we support that whole process? How do we create a local global infrastructure so that we can look at scaling up these innovations in the cities, but at the same time drive a broader global shift? So with that, just going to be concluding by saying the vision here is how cities play a catalytic role in building the larger resilient populations. And our aspiration is to reach 1 billion young people by mainstreaming mental health across sectors. And this is something which is truly a collective action between a number of different institutions globally and locally that's working together. And with that, I'm going to conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think a wonderful illustration of how one can take a very specific issue and work it through to the kind of city I think all of us would like to live in. Are there any questions of clarity? I'm going to move right along. Okay, seeing none. So we've gone from informality to talking about mental health, so how we consider different things about the city. Our next speaker is going to try to tell us how we could actually do different things about the city. So Shauna Carey is here with us. She's the Managing Director and Director of Communications with Ideo.org, where she oversees their international work in a multidisciplinary design firm, which partners with organizations. And this is around designing, developing, and scaling products, services, and experiences. And she's going to be sharing with us how these ideas of human-centered design and technology can help us architect these more inclusive cities. So welcome, Shauna. Really glad to have you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So as Geci mentioned, I work with Ideo.org, and we really occupy ourselves with thinking about the products, services, and systems that we can create around the world to improve people's lives. And as you might imagine, given the trends we heard about already today, a lot of the questions that our partners are coming to us with these days have to do with how to create more resilient, more safe, more secure, and more inclusive urban environments. They're asking us things like, how do we improve food security for families in Dar es Salaam as it grows by the millions? How do we address the epidemic of gender violence in the urban slums of Nairobi? Or in the city where I live, New York, how might we totally rethink the way government services work to address the needs of the most vulnerable New Yorkers? And while there are no easy answers to these questions, we believe that creating inclusive solutions starts with a process that feels quite inclusive. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today, is some of the things that we've learned about how to create a design process that brings people in and allows them to shape their own future. The first one's going to sound obvious, and it's starting by listening. And I say it sounds obvious, but I think everyone here has probably been a part of a project that missed this step just ever so slightly. And I think when we're talking about urban design, it's a really common challenge, right? Because our intention and our instinct is to zoom way out when we're working at the urban scale, to rely on expertise and projections to guide our solution finding and our innovation, and to try and understand the really complex systemic forces at play. But the problem, like a camera lens when you zoom way out, is you start to abstract the individual stories of the people most affected by those challenges. And those stories, those individual moments in the day, the struggles people face, the aspirations they have, the things that they're excited about and they value, hold clues that often make the difference between a promising intervention and a successful one. 2 years ago, we were lucky enough to work with a Skoll awardee, Build Change, in urban Manila on a challenge related to housing. Build Change, when they came to us, had mostly occupied themselves with coming in after a disaster and helping people in low-income urban areas rebuild stronger, more resilient housing. But when they came to us, they wanted to sort of flip that model, and they said, we want to work before disaster ever strikes. We want to help people take out loans and retrofit their slum housing before we have an earthquake or a typhoon or something that they can't recover from. So like we tend to do in human-centered design, we started by listening, and we heard a really interesting thing, which is that nobody wanted a retrofit, no matter how we talked about it. People understood the risks they were facing. Everybody was highly aware that their housing was substandard. But for a family that's living hand-to-mouth or maybe making some really tough trade-offs every day, it was that abstract idea of what could be coming was too big of a leap to take out a loan and offset other financial decision-making. It's a big bummer because we know that the impact that this could have on the lives of people is enormous. So we kept listening. And we started to hear another really interesting pattern, which is while nobody wanted to retrofit their home, everybody spoke about the dreams they had for a bigger, more beautiful, stronger one. Whether it was about leaving a legacy to your children, increasing your status in your community, which we can all probably relate to, or even having an extra room to rent out for income. People were willing to take out a loan today to make those changes in their lives. And so when we just shifted our messaging and started to talk about and create a service around loan to retrofitting that spoke to the needs that people had, Build Change was able to launch a successful pilot that had a 99% repayment rate, which we're really proud of. And they got to that goal they were looking for, but not in the way we had imagined. It could have been a massive failure if we tried to impose the solution we imagined on people who didn't really want it. There's a little shot of the pilot going out. Which brings me to my second point. It's not really enough just to listen at the beginning, which is another common challenge that we face, but we need to set the stage for co-design as we're creating solutions. And I think what we think about great co-design, we think that it really means that the people who are most affected by a challenge, particularly those who are most marginalized, have an opportunity to truly shape the solution as it comes to life, the product or service that they'll use themselves. At IDEO.org, we leverage prototyping to do that. It's hard to tell people what you want, especially if you've never had it before, and it's hard to do that in an abstract way. So for example, when we were designing more inclusive health services in urban Nigeria to reach young women, we knew that getting teenagers to talk to us about their health problems was going to be an enormous challenge. Anybody who lives with a teenager can tell you that. And so we needed to start to create solutions that felt real to help those teenagers and the health workers who needed to work with them articulate for us what they wanted to see so that we could make it real. Leveraging things like existing resources, like an empty room at a local clinic that we sort of made over, or technology tools that are out of the box, like Facebook Messenger, we were able in a matter of weeks to build sort of prototypes and facsimiles of the services we could imagine that we knew were the wrong answer, but what they were also as an invitation for these young people and these health workers to design with us the ultimate solution. These clinics we're really proud of are now operational in urban Nigeria, and tens of thousands of young women are getting reproductive health services at them. And we believe that's because they had a hand in creating them. A little shot of the clinic in action. And then the last thing I want to talk a little bit about is what happens after the design process. So not so much how we get to our first answer, but what happens from there. The thing about the changing urban landscape is that no matter how great the products or services or systems or cities we design are, they'll never be enough, because as cities continue to transform and adapt, so too will the needs and aspirations of the people living inside of them. And so increasingly what we're trying to think about is how do we design solutions that change over time and allow people to continue to shape them as they do. A couple of years ago, we partnered with the American Refugee Committee to design this, Kuja Kuja. This is not in a city, but it's in a similarly densely populated, ever-changing urban environment, which is a refugee settlement called Nakivale in northern Uganda. And Kuja Kuja is a platform that connects refugee customer satisfaction and suggestions for improvements to the services they receive in real time. And we think this is really exciting and emblematic of what we want to see more of in cities, because basically what we're doing is by aggregating those suggestions in a really elegant way, we are able to create a place for in real time for decision makers to listen to and learn from refugee voices themselves, allowing them to shape the programming and even the policies that affect them in the future. I think in cities, this is equally important as we start to see dynamics at play where you have massive amounts of migration and cities changing shape over time, which we've heard a lot about already. So I think we have no answers to what the future of the city will actually look like. There's an unprecedented amount of growth that we're seeing, but we have a hunch that if we co-design it, we can get there. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Shauna. And I love the last point about the adaptability. I think sometimes when we work in cities, and especially people who are trained as planners like I am, it gets quite annoying when people don't behave in the predictable, organized ways to your solutions as you'd like. So I think this ability to understand that people change as well and cities change is really quite important. Any questions of clarity for Shauna before we go into our last input for this set and come back to discussion? Seeing none, thank you very much. So, we've all been talking about what we are trying to do in various organizations. So the one thing every city has, I believe, is a mayor. And so there are always people who are up there really trying to lead cities towards change. We're really excited today to have with us Mayor Sowah from Ghana, who also considers himself a social entrepreneur. And I think that's a really amazing and important reason to have you here today. And so we look forward to hearing your story about how you're trying to lead us towards these more inclusive cities. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's really an honor. I've been eager to be part of this conference for a couple of years back, but I've never had the opportunity. Today I have the opportunity. So thank you very much once again for having me here. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about Accra. Accra has a population of about 2.3 million resident population, but there's a floating population of additional 2 million during the day because it's the city. Everybody drifts towards the city during the day to come and do business one way or the other. There's a lot of government activities, head offices of corporate Ghana, and then the businesses as well. It also has a population a migrant population of 47%, as well as because of the density of the city is about 51 people per hectare. What is important about the economy is that you have 74% of the labor force that are in the informal sector. So inclusivity is not an option, but it's supposed to be part of what we are doing. In June 2015, Accra experienced a very devastating flood that resulted in about 152 deaths, and then a lot of thousands of people were hurt. And that changed our perspective, it changed our focus on how to build a resilient city. And in that case, we conducted a city's diagnostic strength together with the World Bank and other partners, the 100 houses, and we identified some few shocks as well. That informed our strategy going forward. One of it is the flood, which is always a problem, and a normal circumstance around this time, which is the rainy season, mayors hardly travel, because just about 2 days ago, there was a heavy rain which resulted in the flood in Accra. And that flood was not only as a result of the water that causes death, but there was a fire outbreak which also continued. So, and then buildings that also collapsed in Accra because of the way the structures are also put up. And diseases outbreak, there was a massive cholera in Accra in 2015 where it affected over 20,000 people and 200 deaths as well. And then the last one, which is the earthquake. We experienced major earthquake in 1939, but it is predicted that it happens every 100 years. So there's some preparation towards it. Every year around this time, there's earth tremor. We have experienced one already, some earth tremor already. But it is not that scary. It has not resulted, but you need to prepare ahead of it. Because these are the shocks that you should be preparing for all the time. But in building a resilient city, our study also showed certain stresses also that are common often in urban settings. High cost of living as a result of the economic activities, our inefficient transportation system. We have a transportation system where 70% of private vehicles take over the road corridor, and then 30% of the which is remaining taken over by 70%. So that's one of the problems. An inefficient waste management system, to the extent that just 2 years ago we declared that we want to make Accra the cleanest city in the whole of Africa, because we have connected waste management as also one of the causes of the flooding in Accra. And then poor sanitation and water resources. So in building a resilient city and making inclusivity as in the heart of the program that we are pursuing, it's important we set it out in the context of knowing what are the shocks in the system and then the stresses as well. Going forward, in pursuit of these, we identified 5 discovery areas which are very key. Strengthening our urban mobility and transportation system, which is very key because mobility is the lifeblood of managing and a city center, and oftentimes in planning, when you talk about mobility, people only focus on vehicles that are moving about. We don't talk about walkability or the other modes of transportation. And then improving management of waste, which is also connected to flooding. And what is also interesting is about citizen engagement, the disconnect between political leadership and the actors and then the people as well. How do you include people? Citizen engagement is very key, and then recognizing and embracing and supporting the informal sector. If you have 74% of your labor force in the informal sector, you have no option than to embrace it and work with it. And then creating an environmentally sustainable city. We are living in the global world where climate change is real, and it's also part of the reasons why there's a heavy rain in Accra all the time within the shortest period of time, and then it causes flooding. So what are we going to also contribute to make sure that we are part of the global movement in the talk about climate change issues? So what we are guided by the fact that we have a resilience strategy which we are focusing, and based on the discovery areas, what steps are we taking to address the issues of building a resilient city, and as well as making sure that inclusivity is in the heart of it. In the city, 70% of road crash victims are pedestrians, people who walk about. It is also because 53% of the people who are in the central business district are also move about as a result of walking about. So it's important we look at how to ensure that there's a pedestrian safety. We have a pedestrian safety action plan which we focus on, and the bus rapid transport system which ensures that mobility is very key in the areas that we are. And then as well as focusing on the second discovery, the informal settlements are also dotted along the water bodies, and they are affected most as a result of flooding. So how do you strengthen them and to make sure that, making sure that the river bodies are desilted and dredged all the time, and they are always included. Waste management is very key. One of it is that 30% of the waste is collected by small-scale actors in the system who are in the informal sector. So how do you recognize them to make sure that the bigger trucks that you use, the smaller ones also, that creates a lot of employment for a lot of them as well who lived in the informal settlement. So that's what we need. And we recognize them and then make sure that they work with us. Citizen engagement, as part of it, I go around to town all the time and work with the former traders and the rest. You can see me as well over there, actively engaging with the people. The fourth area, which is very also important, is the recognizing the informal sector. Accra is the heart of trading activities, and all the informal traders are actually in Accra. So how do you create space for them to make sure that people earn a living out of it, people make kind of money, get employment out of it? So creating spaces and recognizing them. In our waste management stream, the component of waste, which is scraps, i.e. metal waste, can hardly be found in the waste stream because we've created value for it. So how do you create value for all the waste that you have? E-waste is very important that we have. And then finally, what we do in the discovery, in the fifth discovery about creating an environmental sustainable way, is to make sure that we green all open spaces. So when you come into the cities, there is an aggressive greening which is also going on, having a beautiful landscape to make sure that things are done properly in the city center. Finally, it is also important for us to also identify the fact that in the informal settlements, you create spaces for people also to have an open places to, as a playground. You see, kids are playing, and so how do we pave all these alleys in the communities which are the informal settlements in Accra? We launched our resilience strategy just a couple of weeks ago, and I have copies here also to share. There are a few also online that you can have. This is the strategy that we are following in Accra to build a very resilient city and to make sure that inclusivity is also at the heart of it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. There's some hands for clarification, I think. I saw one here in the middle, and then we've got one there and one there. So we'll take those three if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just Siobhan Crowley here from Children's Investment Fund Foundation. Just wanting to know, for you in terms of being able to follow through and execute against this strategy, what are the kind of resources you need and where are you sort of looking and seeking to get those?
Well, thank you very much for this. One of it it's technical capacity of the leaders that are leading the transformation and working within the space. It's very key. And also the issue about funding. We have a major problem about funding in Accra and Ghana as a whole. So these are the two key things that we're looking at.
Take a second question there, and we can come back to some of these issues if they're interesting.
Hi, it's Buliola from Cape Town. Can I just ask, how do you balance a short-term political career, which is in many respects quite myopic, with a long-term city strategy that you've just now presented?
Thank you very much. I mean, you are very real and very practical. I keep saying that all the time because I come from a personal background of somebody who have worked extensively in urban slums, low-income communities, and I worked extensively as a social entrepreneur for the past 23 years. That shapes my thoughts, and getting into politics, it's for me to take leadership position, because working with a lot of political leaders, I find them to be very myopic and not addressing the long-term issues, but looking at the very short-term issues, which are very political. So it's quite a tricky question to a lot of politicians. But I think that if you're able to move a bit faster and get the people involved, you realize that the third discovery area is about citizen engagement, getting the people along in pursuit of your programs in a very sustainable way. They will appreciate it and then move along with you. But quite a disconnect of politicians somewhere else and the people are somewhere else. When it comes to the political elections time, they will also tell you their thoughts as well. So citizen engagement is extremely important in getting people along and sharing your thoughts with them, and then getting them to be part and parcel of the process that you are doing. And then that will be able to lead the way.
Okay. And we had, I think, was it back there? There was, you're okay? Oh, you wait for the panel. Okay, excellent. So let's take the last one there.
So, Molly Bingham from More Media. It's fascinating what you're applying in your city. Can you talk about the community of mayors around the world and whether you have a network of like-minded individuals who are supporting you on the city level to sort of think through the same situations? Do you see others taking the kind of action you're doing? What's the framework within your working on the mayor structure? Is that?
Well, I think that I'm doing something like this on issues of climate change, where we're looking at the local government's active involvement on issues of climate change. Because when you talk about nationally determined contributions, which is at a national level, but the recognition of local contribution is not well captured. So we've coined our own term, locally determined contributions, which should be aligned to the nationally determined contributions. That is a scale that of which I am on now. I represent the C40 cities of mayors in Africa on it. And then I've been also been nominated to serve on the board of Global Covenant of Mayors as well. But the point is that there should be more of such movement to change the perspectives of mayors and to get the network so that, because cities are increasingly becoming important in everything that we do as a result of urbanization. So if you have political leadership in the cities that are that have a sort of orientation that focuses on building capacity and development, it will help the national government as well. So I share your position, and so far what I have been able to do is to focus more on climate change. But I have also a specialty in local economic development, and that's also another movement I'm trying to create to be able to get some of these things also on board.
And is that a question of clarity, or can we get the panel up? You can hold. Okay, excellent. Let's start getting the panel up, and Mayor will invite you to have a seat on the stage as well.
Right.
But I think it's a really interesting issue. There's an interesting, I think, layer of multilateralism, I think, at the decentralized level that's really, really interesting. And so the Mayor's mentioned some of them, the work that Metropolis and the UCLG and others are doing. And I think what's kind of cool about it is that it's really practice-oriented. I think it really is about mayors looking to learn from each other and support each other, just because a lot of the stuff is just so new. And I think that's quite exciting. I was enjoying listening to the mayor and his bit about the affordability of cities. One of the things that struck me when I first visited Accra was I've struggled in the past trying to get an apartment and being asked to pay 2 months of rent. And so people in Accra were telling me, oh, yeah, it's 2 years. So, so 2 months was, no, and I couldn't imagine. I really couldn't imagine even now how I would come up with the money to pay for 2 years of rent. And apparently that's quite standard.
But the law says 3 months.
But people are paying 2 years.
People are paying 2 years, you know, so that's the reality. You know.
So we've got a few minutes now. We still have time? Excellent. Okay. Is it 10 minutes everything? Oh, my word. Okay. Let's take some questions from the audience. I was hoping to give people some time for a few remarks at the end. We may or may not have that. But let's take as many questions as we can. Please keep them short and tight so we can take as many of you as possible. Give us your name and your comment or your question.
Yeah, hi. Stuart Davidson. Great panel, great presentations. Mr. Mayor, these 4 people talked about different ideas and different approaches to getting information and problem solving. You would strike me as a community organizer in your past and a mayor now as a customer. And so I'm wondering, what do you think of those approaches? And then you described the 5 things you're working on in Accra. And how are you achieving those ends, and are you using some of those techniques?
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I'm quite familiar with a lot of the things that you've said, and we're working closely with a lot of partners in Accra. For instance, the Accra Resilience Strategy that we developed, we work with 100 RC, 100 resilient cities that, you know, help us to develop it. So we've been doing that and working with a lot of technical people and that. It's just a matter of time, and that's wonderful woman from Cape Town just said that, look, as a politician, you have 4 years to go to the people to account for your stewardship. A lot of the technical support takes a bit of time to bear fruit. So you ask yourself, you know, what do you do with some of these things? And that's why at the heart of it is engagement. If you get disconnected with the people, what it means is that you are likely to abandon whatever programs that you are doing to go and fulfill electoral promises which are not sustainable. And that happens not only at the city level, but it happens at the national level. You have a program with the World Bank, you have a program with the IMF, but you abandon it at the last end of the year, and then you do your own thing just to do something. That's quite a tough one.
Yeah. Good question at the back.
Thanks very much. Excellent panel. I'm Megan from Canada, from Vancouver, and I work primarily on the overdose crisis, both in North America and internationally. And so my question is partly to my citiesRISE colleague, fantastic initiative. Curious how much work you're doing on prohibition of drugs, which we see as a big root cause of the overdose crisis and fentanyl we're experiencing in Canada, and criminalization, and then maybe to some of the other panelists, given that police forces are often the remit of municipalities and mayors. What are you doing to sort of shift a focus on the war on drugs and criminalization of drugs and move towards more of a mental health and supportive approach? Thanks so much.
So you want to comment on that?
I don't mind. You go first. You go first.
You can talk.
Please.
Thank you so much for that question. As you mentioned, I think as we've been looking at, you know, what are some of the most critical problems, the issue of addiction and how this plays itself out in the communities and who are the actual stakeholders. So when you think about the frontline people, so very often whether it's the police workers or other people, the way we are approaching the problem is that how do you create a platform where you bring these different stakeholders? So we are talking about formal, informal, whether it's the teachers, whether it's the police workers, and then as the priority for a given city gets defined, very often the issue of addiction is surfacing, whether it's a Seattle or whether it's a Nairobi. And so the way we are looking at it is that how do you come behind the local leadership in these communities, and then where are the sectoral or the system leaders, whether it's teachers in education systems, whether it's police workers, what's the leadership at the subnational city county level, and how do you say in the case of Kenya, you're working with NACADA right in the beginning, so you're looking at national policy, but at that subnational city county level, and then down to sort of the community level. So who are the different actors, and how do you create a platform so that collectively they agree to what is a tangible change that we can make, whether it's addiction or whether it's depression, and that's how we are engaging that conversation.
It's worth just making one comment on the Canadian Council for Mental Health. They have prepared a very good training manual for police and law and order forces. And that is the kind of thing that also is necessary in addition to what my colleague has said.
I would just add on that one that in our context, well, first of all, policing is not always a local function. In many African countries, it's still very much a national function. I don't know what it is in Ghana and maybe in India. And part of the issue there, what is definitely a local function, are the other non-securitized policing things one can do that are about prevention, about violence and crime prevention, about the social development that you need to underpin a healthier system. And we've tried in our context, increasingly cities are taking on those functions, the policing functions. And unfortunately, sometimes what goes with that is thinking policing is what matters and is the only thing that matters. So we're seeing an expanse of CCTV cameras, Bulelweve in South Africa, you know this, policing and a focus on more police on the street and less actually for the social programs that probably could gain from a lot more funding.
Hi, Claire Shine, Salzburg Global Seminar. We're in the process of building out collaborative work looking at the intersect of nature, health and cities, with a particular focus both on new urban generations who are growing up more and more disconnected from the original resource base, but also on elders in isolation as the generational and family structures break down. We reckon that trillions will be spent on urban development in the next decades, but there is an elephant in the room around nature and the idea that the livable city must also be the living city, and nature-based solutions are incredibly important in terms of the economy of the resilient and climate-friendly city. So I'm really interested, both for the panel and others, to have views on how nature, access to green space, safe spaces to play, but also in view of the neuroscientific research of the importance of access to the natural environment when people are little, how much that is coming up in the space of your work, because our sense is that it's very much on the margins, and yet the economic and scientific case backs it up 100%.
Great, so I think it's a great question. Does anybody want to talk about this?
Quite active on the issues of climate change, and for those of us who manage cities where there's population growth in the city that is leading to shortage of housing. In Accra, for instance, in the informal sector, you need about 3,000 households. So there's a competition for space. How you green open spaces or you build, physical structures there, and also to contribute to some of these things. In my view, what we're doing in Accra is to also to promote in urban planning science, to promote the use of the airspace. So as I saw a lot of, in some informal settlements, in some areas where they are taking the airspace and also to build it so that you have small land and people have spaces to live there, so that you can leave space for green activities as well. Because if care is not taken, Accra, it's a very green area. If you're flying over, you see a lot of trees there. But as a result of the pressure, if you are not careful, years to come, all the trees will go down, and that's our contribution.
Chris, you had something to add on this?
Yes, just a very quick one. In 1978, I created my first social enterprise, which we call the Society for Horticultural Therapy. And, and this is also now called Thrive, Skoll.org.uk. And basically it works to the premise that Claire has actually really talked about, which is this important intersectionality between people and nature, and now, in this context, the city. And there is now an enormous amount of evidence that, which is peer-reviewed evidence, that all kinds of people, but young people especially, do tremendously better if they have access to nature in one form or another. And I think this is a really important question that you're looking at, Claire.
There were some more hands here.
Hi.
I just wanted to, so just for a quick second, I wanted to add on this point. I think it's also a human-centered issue. I often feel very much in our context that part of the problem is this duality of what we present as cities being, and then a narrative that suggests that having green is about just being green because somebody said you ought to be green, whereas a lot of people have a spiritual and a cultural connection to the earth and actually would prefer for their praying and for their other things to actually have access to the green. The question is, how do we evolve and co-design cities maybe that look different than what we may be used to, and they might actually be green, not just because a book said. Yeah, sorry. Just keep standing, don't give up. No, stay there.
Just one quick thing. I'm so happy that you asked that question, because I think one of the things we are seeing is that we have been fragmenting the human being in so many different ways, and part of the thing that we are hoping is that integration of the person, but also our connectedness between each other, with nature. So what we are looking at is those three dimensions of the inner journey of the human being, the social journey, as well as the environmental journey. And I think nature, arts, all of these things are not often interconnected in a way. So this is where it's very exciting. We are seeing that that is truly the nucleus around which some of these new designs are evolving.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for an excellent panel as well. I'm actually inspired by so many comments and questions here as well to ask this. So basically what I'm hearing is there's this need to bridge the conversation between the politicians, policymakers, whose sometimes short tenure is just a reality to work with and to work within. So, and also, it also underlies their motivation sometimes to find quick solutions, really, obvious solutions, something that the whole world, the whole city, the whole globe can see, where sometimes the changes really needed are not so, shall I say, flashy, right? So my question is actually to you, Smruti. You said you mentioned that you work with federations of the urban poor. So how do the federations of the urban poor maintain those conversations and actually co-create solutions with the city officials, with politicians, and across these political sort of changes in the political climate?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think that the question also comes from the fact that politics and politicians are also there for a short term. So, so what happens at the end of their term? So the answer is that with federations, the difference is that they themselves create these solutions for the problems. So the ownership of the problem and the solution is sustainable. So it continues even after the term of the politician. So I think that is how they're able to come up and co-create these solutions. So they only need certain things from the city at a certain point in time. Like say, for example, when we are constantly challenging them to say that this is not how you're supposed to live, but we tell you a better way of living it, they say we don't want that. We only want water and sanitation. Just give us that and we know how to better design our houses. So if the governments give them only that, what they need, they are better equipped to continue in their own processes to take it forward, to come up with solutions that are then long-term.
So we're out of time. We're going to take the last question just because I said we could, and we'll keep it very tight. And then what we're going to do is I'd asked our wonderful panelists to think about a takeaway that they could gift you at the end of this, and we'll just go a few minutes over just to take a minute each to give that after this last question. So.
Thank you. My name is Hildegard Vasquez. I'm from Panama. So Panama is doing very much what Accra is doing in terms of resilient cities. But my question is a bit for Smruti and citiesRISE. You talked about the sense of belonging that comes with actually belonging to a village within that bigger concept of the city. And you talked about mental health. And I'm really wondering, I work with actually trying to develop mental health within the urban environment. How do you actually connect these two and really use the sense of belonging to then, generate the mental health that's needed for the economic growth to happen within the inhabitants.
You want to go ahead?
Sure. So I think, the issues here are so intertwined, and part of the reason I think mental health is a fascinating subject, because in some ways it underpins everything from your educational attainment to productivity to your economics and all of these different areas, because if you don't address that issue, so the way we've been looking at it is that, as when Smruti was showing some of the belonging and the different engagement pieces, that the fundamental types of innovations and the interventions and how these different linkages are happening, we are not limiting it to just mental health as an illness or a health issue, but something that is much more fundamental to whether it's coping skills, whether it's the type of support and new types of systems that you need in workplaces, in schools, in colleges. So ultimately, it kind of cascades across those different aspects of life. And I think that's the kind of interconnectivity and the linkages that you need when you start thinking from a design perspective.
Great. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I don't think if I'll be able to answer it well, but the way I see it is that all of us have a belonging to a neighborhood that we come from. But for most of these citizens that we are talking about today, their sense of belongingness to the village or to the area is because they have constantly been challenged about their belongingness to the city, because the city never wanted them. And that's why they're there in that small little niche where they find comfort. And everything else, be it health, be it access to transport, be it access to housing, everything is all interlinked, because their challenge to being accepted in the city is also it reflects in the way they accept services, because they don't have these access to so many services, that they're all interlinked that way. So to me, it's because they do not have a choice, that they feel that that's the only place where they belong, that they do not. So even if you look at Mukuru, for example, people are working in that neighborhood only. So you ask them what's happening 7 kilometers in the CBD, they really don't know, because and that area has no access to transport, so they actually walk so much time to work and come back, and they're making their ends meet. They really have no time to understand what else is happening in the city.
So really great question to end on. We're out of time. I'm going to just invite us to gift our audience back, and maybe since the last shall be first, we can begin with you, Mayor, and just go down in just a minute, a takeaway.
Well, thank you very much once again. I think that for us as city managers, building a resilient city, it's the way to go to have a sustainable development. But it's important to recognize needs of all the octets, especially the informal sector, which is very key. Because urbanization is real. People will be drifting towards the city to find means of livelihood, and if they can't find it, they will live in an informal settlement. It's a political leadership that should be thinking of some of these things. The next, how do you envision your city to look like in the next 20 years, and what are you preparing for? You don't have to wait for you to be overrun by events to worsen the situation. So that for me is a challenge to me, and also to all technical people who are also represented here. When you are shaping our thoughts, let us think about the next couple of years. The figures are very clear to all of us. Thank you.
I think the main thing I'd like all of us to think about is that, I mean, in this world that we live in today, given its complexity and speed and interconnectedness, I think we should forget this business about architecting solutions. We should instead think about how do you unleash, where is that energy, where is the leadership, where do you connect? So really you're creating the kind of capacity and linkages for people and systems and communities to really respond and find the solutions. And I think there's a way we can look at, things that happens in private sector or other places where, why is it that we go from concept to things to market so quickly, but in the issues that matter to humanity and everything, we can't just seem to get it. So how do we kind of create those types of systems and linkages so that we can really kind of support that type of acceleration? So I'd like to just, see if we can reflect on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would, as I think about what I'm hearing back in the room and from my fellow panelists today, I think there's so many challenges we're all trying to tackle that feel like trade-offs in the moment, right? Do you want better infrastructure, or do you want a sense of belonging? Do you want a relationship with nature, or do you want a roof over your head that's not going to fall down the next earthquake? We have these trade-offs we're making every day. But it strikes me that the lived experience of those cities, like the same people are experiencing all those things every day. And so actually they're intertwined, and I wonder how we might better collaborate to design cities and systems and services that reflect that interconnectedness rather than addressing one thing at a time, and I wonder if that's what's leaving us with a relatively disconnected set of systems. Thank you.
I think if each one of us today went away and made a commitment to be less stigmatic towards mentally ill people, that would be a big start from my point of view. And to understand that people who you see who are homeless and mentally ill on the street are only a tiny, tiny percentage of the mentally ill in that city. You know, if you take a normal population of people, a big population such as the mayor's population in Accra, something like 6% of people will have depression, and that is equally forceful and a punishing mental illness, which often has very little understanding. So resilience, from my point of view, good resilience in a city is a contribution to good mental health. Good sustainable development is a contribution to good mental health. And in a sense, we do need to see, as Moitreyee, my colleague, has said earlier, the way in which mental illness underpins all of these different matters, whether it's an economic zone, or whether it's the housing department, or whether it's the police department. It underpins all of these things and has to be understood intentionally as much as it has to be understood spiritually.
Thank you. So I think I see a lot of hope in this room that whichever sector you all come from, maybe it could be any of the sectors that you're working in, I ask all of you to look at informality from a different lens because they have different needs, and to constantly question the bias that we all have been imprinted with. So we never question the standards, we never question what is given to us. To give an example, where we are redefining the planning frameworks to create the statutory plan, 135 LPCD, which is liters per capacity per day, is per capita per day, is what is the norm for water requirement for any city. And these are international standards, but no one questioned that. There is a split up of how much do you use for sanitation, for drinking water, for cooking, etc. But when we really looked at it closely, what we realized is that people are living up to only 20 liters per day, or maybe 40 liters per day. And the city is only able to give 80 liters. So who are these norms for, and for who are we designing these norms? So in whichever sector you're working in, think of informality when you look at solutions, or even when you're collaborating with them. Try a different lens which has never been used before, and try to really rationalize and question all the systems on which you've been working or been given over this period of time. I think that is the biggest thing for me to give you all as a takeaway today.
Excellent. So I think this has been a great panel to speak to the three invitations I suggested at the beginning, that we can imagine that cities may not only be what we think they can be, that the people who can do it are not just us, that there are billions of people out there that we could engage in different ways to do something different, something exciting, and that there's the possibility of new tools and new alliances and new methods, new ways of thinking that actually allow us to do something different. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to our panel and to the support team that's been with us, and enjoy your lunch. They'll be available.